All right, I'm glad to have everyone here today. We are joined by Shirley Bloomfield, who is the CEO of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, which represents about 850 independent telco companies in rural America. The telcos, if you guys recall, are about half of our membership, balancing out our electric co-ops. And Shirley is also a member of our board of directors. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to, get my cursor, my mouse on the right slide. And we're going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to go through a little history of the women in telecom. I'm going to keep it fast. The slides will be out later, so you can read some of the details that I have in here. But I want to save as much time as possible to talk with Shirley about her experience in telecom. So on that note, a little bit of an entry into telecom were what were officially known as cable girls, right? And they were the first telephone operators back when, you had the switchboards you can see on the right side of the screen here, where they had to actually be the manual control, plugging one phone call to another phone call. Interestingly enough, I thought until a couple of days ago when I was doing all my history that women were the first telephone operators, but initially they were actually young teenage boys, and they were kind of rude and abrupt. And so Alexander Graham Bell said, "Hey, women possess all of the traits that we want in a female or in a telephone operator." And so he hired Emma Nutt in 1878 as that first telephone operator. And you can see the criteria that women had to meet in order to be that operator. They had to pass height and weight and arm length test. You wonder why it's arm length tests. If you look at these areas that they're working in, they're kind of tight quarters, but they had to be able to move from one end of the top to the bottom, side to side, to plug these phone calls and coordinate them. And despite the fact that they were not being seen by anybody, their dress had to be approved by, their managers. They were monitored for efficiency and courtesy. We do that today to some extent in the call center business as we know it, but it was much more rigorous back then. And they had to be single and actually had to ask for permission to get married. No idea why that mattered in the ability to connect calls, but that's how it was then. By the way, I told a few people, I normally dread doing research on projects. It's just not my favorite thing. This was one of the most fun research things I got to do in the last few years. I'm not going to go through all of these bullets on the slide here. Again, I want to save time for Shirley, but you can see some of the names listed here and the impact they had starting back in the 18th century beyond the cable girls. And the article that you see on the right here was actually a article in a Cosmo magazine back in April of 1967, where the term went from cable girls to computer girls. I had this slide up at the beginning when you all came on. There's a lot of information on here. These are just some of the women that changed the tech world. I'm going to highlight a couple. Hedy Lamarr, she was an actress, but her passion was innovation. And she wasn't really allowed to kind of dabble in that until she met Howard Hughes, who saw what, her mind was coming up with, and enabled her innovation mindset. And she's now known as the mother of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and GPS. So while she was famous for being an actress, she was also a famous innovator. Radia Perlman is known as the mother of the internet for creating protocols that we use in network bridging. One of the other, Grace Hopper, was credited with creating COBOL, which is a programming language. And Elizabeth Feinler helped come up with what we know as domain names and domain name systems and protocols that we use today to navigate the internet. I highlight those because if you look at their birth years, we think of the internet as in our lifetime, and a lot of this stuff was happening way before we ever even knew of the internet. The quick statistics, just to give you guys perspective on things, women right now represent about 47% of all employed adults in the US, but really only represent about 25% of the computing roles in those jobs. And that's despite the fact that there's been a 79% growth in STEM jobs. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And women still make up a very small subset despite that growth in those jobs in that area. There are a lot of women that major in computer science, but the reality is that of those women that major in computer science, only 38% work in that field versus men who graduate with a degree in computer science. This one, I think different groups within NRTC can relate to. 72% of women in technology jobs report being outnumbered by men in business by a ratio of at least 2 to 1. And in some cases, 26% report being outnumbered by men 5 to 1 or more. And I can tell you, I sit on calls all the day and sometimes take screen grabs of my Teams call, just to sit there and count how many men are on a call, and I'm the only female. So it is something relevant to our industry. And then this last statistic, this was more of a mindset. 25% of women feel like they will be promoted to executive management versus 54% of men who feel like they will be promoted into management. So the takeaway here is that while historically women have played a great role in technology, there's still room for more women in technology. And with that, I'd like to transition over to a discussion with Shirley. As I mentioned, she's the CEO of NTCA, and thought it would be good to hear from her about her experiences in the tech world and share some insights from her career. So Shirley, thank you for being here.
I'm delighted. I appreciate the invitation, Alana. Thank you.
So Shirley, would you mind telling us a little bit about your career and your rise through NTCA and the telecom world in general?
I'd be delighted to, but you're going to be astounded by how unscientific actually my adventure really was. I think I'm an accidental technologist. So I actually moved out to Washington, D.C. After studying economics, and really thought I'd do public policy work, which was kind of where my passion was. So I worked up on Capitol Hill on the House Budget Committee, where the advantage of the Budget Committee is you get to be a little bit of a jack of all trades. You cover, one day you're focused on agriculture programs, another day you're focused on commerce funding. So it was a great opportunity for me to be exposed to a lot of different things. And quite frankly, what wound up happening is there was somebody who had actually been a lobbyist for NTCA, then the rural, NTCA, the National Telephone Cooperative Association. We've gone through major iterations since that time, because this was well over 30 years ago. And she was going on maternity leave, and she said, you know what, I'm not coming back. We've got this job. I already lobby you on the budget committee. Would you be interested in doing it? And I thought, well, I know how to dial a telephone. I can do this. So that is literally how I ended up at NTCA years and years ago. So had the opportunity to grow, get to know the member companies, get to understand the industry, get to see some of their challenges, and watching the evolution of these companies as they became broadband providers and all service providers in the communities they serve, further kind of expanded that. But I will say I did take a detour still in the industry where about 12 years ago or so, I was offered the opportunity to run the federal operation for Quest, which then became CenturyLink and then became Lumen. And it was kind of an opportunity, as much as I love the NTCA members, I couldn't say no to. So I did that gig for a little bit, for a couple of years during, particularly during the conventions, which was a wonderful chance to host conventions in both Denver and in Minnesota and Minneapolis. Then worked for Verizon. And then when the position at NTCA opened to come back about 12 years ago, I literally probably scared the headhunter by calling her and saying, that is my job. I am coming back. Just hold on for me. So it's been a great ride. So, coming back at a time when the industry was thinking through things like seeking scope and scale, we were able to unify with another trade association in the space so we could speak with one voice as our members were going through really becoming robust broadband providers and thinking through what that meant. So it's been a great ride. And I learned to be in the technology field literally accidentally, Alana. I wish I had something more like purposeful than that. But my husband still thinks I should be able to program the TV every time we have a power outage, and that is not always the case. But I know who to call now.
That is an awesome experience. What have you noticed about the landscape in women in technology and even in particular women in technology leadership over your career?
So I think there's been some really interesting traction, and I think it's something that we've really got to keep our eye on and be purposeful about and maintain some of that momentum. But I will also be honest that it is not without challenges. I look at my own experience having two daughters who are well into their careers in their early 30s. Neither one of them was interested in STEM. And just that whole thing that I think we still have young girls shying away from some of the sciences and some of the math. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in the education system to demystify some of the STEM education that's out there. But, I was thinking about it the other day, Alana, when you and I were talking, and I do think it kind of goes back to what we grow into, which is having that fear of not being right all the time. I think sometimes young women are raised with that expectation that we've got to be good and we've got to be right and we want to be thoughtful before something leaves our mouth. And I see it honestly with women who suffer from the imposter syndrome. And I wonder sometimes if that's not a little bit of what stops young women from going into science and math, because there's that pressure of being right. There's and it's tougher to take it. But I'm seeing a great evolution. One of the things we do at NTCA is we have a Women in Telecom initiative, which and you and some of your team are involved in. We're so delighted to have you around the table. But we started that about 10 years ago. We actually started it when I was here, my first iteration. So it's really been in existence for 20 some years, but we've been able to put more resources towards it in the last 10. But it's really finding that place for women to be able to compare notes, to be able to share experiences, to be able to share training tips with one another. And I am seeing a lot more women running NTCA member companies. It's really gratifying to see the different paths that people are taking to CEO leadership within NTCA members. Used to be very outside plant oriented. We're seeing a lot of financial being very key, operational being very key, some of the areas where women may have more grown up through the company. And I see a great transition even within NTCA. When I look at the NTCA Board of Directors, we now have 2 women who have been elected to the board. And we have a number of trust committees that run our pension plan and savings plan and run our group health plan. We are now at 50-50 in terms of men and women on both of those trust committees. And they are very, very important and powerful trust committees within our operation because they control literally billions of dollars of assets. So watching that step by step, I think has been really important. But I will also just share one other insight. We run an executive search service. We place a lot of C-suite folks in NTCA member companies. And I will post a position, and I'm always struck by how few women we have submitting resumes. And again, it goes back to that imposter syndrome. And I have a friend who's a recruiter for Russell Reynolds, and she shared with me that she will get resumes for, she'll post a job and somebody will be like, I have one of the 10 things you've outlined on there. I am perfect for this job. And she said, my women candidates are like, oh, I only have 9 of the 10. I'm not quite sure I'm the best fit here. So it is kind of getting over some of those things I still think we have to do. But one of the things we're doing in that space is we like to make sure that every CEO search, we are putting at least one woman's resume into that pile, so that boards become a little bit more accustomed to seeing different names come across when they think about leadership. So I think we've got to be thinking about where at every step of these journeys we can make sure that we're being good about exposure, and we're good about kind of lifting the veil a little bit, Alana.
That is all really, really encouraging, Shirley. It really is. Have you had, what was your toughest experience that you've gone through, and how did that make you who you are?
All right, we're going to do some soul bearing here. So toughest experience, honestly, was when I did work for Quest. Quest was obviously in trouble, as you could see from the fact that they then actually sold out to CenturyLink, who took control of the company. But at the time, we were doing some really great work, but I'll never forget, the general counsel wound up sitting down with me and he said, you know what? Every dollar of your salary, he hated Washington, D.C. He had everything to do with politics, policy, couldn't quite see how that actually impacted the company, which I think is entertaining now in this fifth iteration of the company as I look at them with Brightspeed going after probably a decent amount of federal funding through the infrastructure initiative. But his story was every dollar of your salary is money we could put into plant in the ground. So therefore, we don't really think we want to focus on public policy anymore. And, that was a hit in the gut because it was hard for me to leave NTCA, and I had done a leap of faith. I was a little bit discouraged already from the fact that I had talked to my CEO about why we weren't building more infrastructure in rural markets. And his response to me had been, we have no competition in those markets. We don't have to do any upgrades, and they are cash cows. So, it really forced me to kind of do some internal thinking about, where did I want to be and where was the right leadership from the top, because leadership is really important to me. Following a leader is very important to me. So I started really kind of going through the contacts that I knew and ended up at Verizon. And for as much as Verizon couldn't be more different than most of NTCA's members, it was a company with a really clear mission, very clear vision. I worked for Ivan Seidenberg, who knew exactly what he wanted to do. And if it wasn't going to be Fios fiber, he wasn't going to have the property anymore. And I learned a great deal, but it forced me to really think about being able to work where I have a passion. And that if I didn't have a passion and I didn't have a buy-in, it was just work. And life was a little too short for that. So it was a good lesson to learn, and obviously a great experience coming out the back end. So but it did force me to hold up a mirror a little bit to myself at, that midpoint inflection in your career.
That is a great reflection point. Now that you're a CEO, are you facing different challenges, new challenges?
Non-stop challenges. No, I'm just kidding, actually. Although I see that we have Fiona with us, and I do sometimes think, wow, if we didn't have staff, this job would be so easy. But I would say a couple of things. First of all, working with a board can be really fun. It can also be really challenging. So I've appreciated greatly being able to work with Tim on the NRTC board, because he does such a wonderful job really making a partnership between staff and the board. I think responding to a board, and I have 2 boards at NTCA because I also run our benefit plans, in addition to working with the trustees on the different benefit plans. It's a different model, and trying to get everybody on the same page to understand that, yeah, we may be staff, but we're actually trying to implement your vision and being collaborative. And some of that turnover on a board can also then be a little bit disruptive as you're, thinking your mid strategy, and then you've got 4 new voices around the table and you're at a different strategy. The other thing I would say as a CEO, I feel very responsible for my team. And I probably have never felt that more than during the pandemic, when there was this really strong sense of, how do I keep my staff safe? How do I keep the operation going? How do I make sure we retain our financial health? How do we pivot the services that are so key? And in the meantime, broadband is top of mind for everybody. So that created a wonderful learning experience that I think I should do once in a lifetime, maybe not on a routine basis. But that level of responsibility can feel very heavy at times. And but it is one of the things that I will say also makes it very rewarding, to get to work with a great group of people and to be able to be given the space to say, all right, what's my vision? What's my vision, and how do I rally everyone around with me to follow that vision? And that's a really empowering place to be.
I think CEOs and HR employees took the brunt of dealing with the pandemic. So my hats off to all of you. I want to pull on a thread and part of your response on having two boards. Did you face any resistance or challenges as the female CEO taking over NTCA with either of your boards?
So that was really, that's a really interesting question. Actually, a couple of things on that point. No, the NTCA board was amazing. They're obviously the ones who hired me, but to their willingness to be transparent, they made it very clear. We had great engaging discussions during the interview process, and it was fun to share with them things that I learned in the time that I'd been away from NTCA. But after that, I was hired, I really did have a couple of them who said to me, if you hadn't left, if you had just stayed and you'd been the good soldier and you'd been doing the work and you were the ones pushing all this stuff behind the scenes, I'm not sure we would have hired you. It took you going away for us to see what we needed and to see what we had lost without you there. And I have kind of conflicting emotions about that, because on one hand, I was like, well, I was there. You should have known. I'd been there 20 years. But I also admired their transparency about it. The thing with my SMC board that I will say is I knew coming in what my weak spot was going to be. I knew that, I could knock out how we're going to do meetings. I could knock out what discussions we needed at the FCC. But the idea of having nearly $5 billion worth of assets for people's healthcare and their pension and their savings and their life really made me spend that first year doing a ton of homework in that space. So I really doubled down in that area, knowing that was the area I was going to have to prove myself. That was the area I was going to have to get comfortable in, to even have my own sense of credibility going forward. So I had a strategy, and thankfully the SMC board was behind me 100%. The NTCA board gave me the time and the latitude to go to all of the trustee meetings, to be able to kind of really roll my hands up, get to know the consultants, figure out our investment strategies, and all of our specs. So that was extremely helpful. But it was also, on that thread though, Alana, I did have years ago a member of mine who also was on the NRECA board of directors. He was not on my board. He was on NRECA's board, but he also sat on a telephone board. And he was talking to me about when they had hired Joanne Emerson over at NRECA. And he said that at one point in the discussion, they were having a discussion about different candidates. And one was obviously Joanne, a woman, their first woman. They hadn't hired her yet. And he said, you know what? Get over it, guys. We hired a woman over at NTCA and things are going fine. So go ahead. So I love that he shared that with me, because I just had this image of this boardroom and him being like, yeah, look, NTCA didn't fall apart. It's all going to be okay. And Joanne, when she was in that role, we joked about that a few times. But sometimes you just need to see somebody kick that door. You just need to see that role model, and you need to kick the door. And that's partially what we all hope to be able to do.
So I have one last question, and we're running out of time, but that gentleman made the comment of, we hired a woman over at NTCA. That's in one way advocating on behalf of women, but what can men and women in our industry do to really advocate and become allies of women in the technology world beyond his comment?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's really important. And I think women have one role. I think, I've always gone by the Madeleine Albright strategy of there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. I feel a strong sense of obligation to do that. But I think men play a very unique role. And I think it's also when you talk about fathers who get engaged with their daughters, how those women are the ones that really can have that self-confidence and can break through. But I think we have to be purposeful. I think it is thinking through when you've got a woman on your team, what exposure is she being given? Is she having some of those opportunities? And sometimes making sure that we hold the mirror up to make sure that we are treating members of our team in equal ways. So I'm not just saying just give the women the opportunities, but make sure that you're giving everybody on your team, regardless of color, creed, gender, some of those same opportunities, and being purposeful and sometimes being strategic about it. I actually have a saying that somebody had shared with me that I really, really love, which was the reason you lead is because the vision you have is bigger than the resources you have. And I think of that, and it really leads me to think, it's going to take a village, and there's a lot of work we can all be doing together.
I like that saying. I'd not heard that one before, so I'm
I do
gonna
too.
look that up. I'm gonna stop asking questions and open it up for anybody to ask questions. I don't see anything in chat, but feel free to unmute and ask Shirley your own questions. Or maybe Shirley did such a great job just covering everything.
Answered it all. Yeah, I'm just making sure that Tim doesn't unmute. I'm watching that button very closely up there.
Well, it's funny. Alana asked my question. It was actually the very last question. There are 80 some people on this call, and I'm betting a bunch of them are men. And my question was going to be, what role can men play to further women in technology businesses? And one thing resonated, and it's not a question, Shirley. I have two daughters as well, and I think nothing is more empowering than focusing on your daughters and making them the best that they can be. I think as a parent, not a leader, but as just a parent, I think that is something that all of us need to do to push our daughters forward, to let them go down any path they want to go down.
Can I also add to that, Tim? And I admire that, and I see it with your daughters as well. And obviously, the fruit is the result of the labor. But sometimes we think we're being funny, right? Sometimes we're at a meeting and somebody, I remember once I was the only woman, and I was pretty junior on our senior team at NTCA. And I'd walk into our 4-person, strategic thinking weekly, and they'd make jokes about, did you bake cookies for the meeting today?
Yeah.
It's not funny. So being mindful and kind about those things. There, when we're at meetings and people are talking about, well, are you a spouse? Are you this? Are you? I still will say that, I'll walk into meetings and people will kind of sometimes treat me like my thought doesn't count. And then it's like, oh, you're CEO. And suddenly it's like, okay, now I'm interested in what you have to say. Well, you should have been interested in what I had to say before. So I also think that it's so easy to think about like the humor in these situations. It's just important to know that women are still sensitive to it. For example, we run a women in telecom event, usually at our big meetings. I still get men who say, why is there a special event for women? And every woman who's walking into that room has to be like, well, look at the rest of the meeting. It's a meeting for men. So can we just have our 1 hour in this room, to compare notes or to hear some special things we need to be mindful of regarding leadership and the way we lead? So again, I think people in the best of intentions, sometimes can do things, and that's where I think men can also be better. I think there's real opportunities to bring those female colleagues, who might not be invited to the golf game, but bring them in for a beer afterwards at the bar. Make sure they're part of that discussion. There's nothing worse than hearing that everybody else had this chat because you were in that foursome together, and oh, I'm hearing about it afterwards. It's just thinking about how inclusive we can all be.
So
Doesn't have to be on the ice rink. But it can be after the ice rink.
Right. We had a couple of comments come in. This is a great session. My stepmother was an early programmer with punch cards from Bailey. Tim's singing your high praises, Shirley. And then Catherine Bowman said, excuse me, I run a Girl Scout troop and we are very, very active in the STEM programs available. So just some feedback that people are sharing.
Well, and I mean, for those who didn't read my note, Shirley has been a fantastic friend and collaborator. She leads by example. I think it's been my honor to know her for the last 11 years.
Thank you, Tim. And Robert, I'm still not going to play hockey. I appreciate that you know women hockey players, and I love that. Women can do anything, but
Yep.
you know,
That's
I have
okay. I don't play golf, so.
I have coached many girls in my youth hockey coaching career, and it's been a fantastic experience as well. There's nothing better than having girls and boys 8, 9, 10 years old on the same team. It's been a fantastic experience. So much fun.
You know, so Tim, even just talking about, 8 or 9-year-old girls, that's another thing I would share, that just culturally in our space, the rural space, I still get I'm going to ask the girls back at the office about this or that. I know, sometimes we can be a little thin-skinned, but again, I think about a leading by example, and where men can help lead by example. It is that, if you're in that conversation group, to next time it's an opportunity, you don't have to call everybody on it, because our members get, they don't want that either, but to be like, well, the women who, try, how do we model some of that so we can get away from some of that terminology that appears harmless, but it's hard to, how do you then put your hat in the ring for the CEO position when you're one of the girls? It's things like that. I think there's things we can do. I think they're subtle, but I think they're important. And that's where, again, I go back to, let's be purposeful, let's be mindful.
Yeah, I echo what Shirley was saying on that last part. I visit with members and I often hear, if I ask a question, they're like, oh, let me go ask the girls out front, or say, phrases similar to that. And it's a little disarming at times. So yeah, I understand that. We are over by a couple minutes and I don't see any other questions coming in. Shirley, I appreciate you being here so much. I'm grateful for you sharing your history and your background. And I will share to everyone else. Shirley is very accessible. She responds to emails directly. So if you have follow-up questions, Shirley, I hope you don't mind, but her email address is already in our contacts in Microsoft as a board member. So feel free to ask your questions to her directly.
It has been a treat to be with all of you. I really appreciate it greatly and look forward to the continuing discussion, and look forward to seeing you at the next NRTC board meeting.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Have a
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.